I opened my eyes and there was no one. Just trees, just silence, just the cold seeping into my bones. My backpack was still under my head. I had used it as a pillow. But the car was gone. My son was gone. Daniel had not looked me in the eye for months, and that Sunday he showed up smiling. "Dad, let's go for a picnic." I believed him. My God, I believed him. When I woke up, it was already getting dark, and there was a taste in my mouth that I recognized immediately. The same taste as when the doctor gave me something strong to sleep after losing Elizabeth. But this time it was different, stronger, heavier, and then I understood. They had left me here, on purpose, so I would never come back. If this story touches your soul, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Here we share real stories every day. Tell us where you are watching from. I opened my eyes and understood nothing. My head felt heavy as if someone had put a stone inside it. My mouth tasted bitter, metallic, horrible. I tried to sit up, but my hands were shaking. I knew that sensation. When I lost my wife, Elizabeth, 5 years ago, I could not sleep. The nights were eternal. The doctor prescribed me something, and when I woke up after taking it, I felt exactly like this. A weight in my head, dry mouth, slow movements. But this time it was different. This time it was stronger, as if they had given me double or triple. And while I tried to focus my eyes while I looked at the treetops moving with the wind, I thought, something is not right. I looked around, and the first thing I saw was the silence. There were no voices, no laughter. The car engine was not running, waiting for me. It was just me. Me and that damn tree where they had asked me to rest. The sun was already going down. The light was turning orange between the branches. How long had I slept, I did not know. But the afternoon was already leaving. I tried to call them. Daniel. My voice came out hoarse, broken. Sarah, nothing. Just the wind moving the leaves. Just the song of some bird in the distance, and that silence that tells you that you are completely alone. My name is Arthur Montgomery. I am 81 years old. I was a literature professor for 40 years in the city. I became a widower 5 years ago when Elizabeth passed away. Since then, I live alone on my ranch, surrounded by my small library and my memories. I have 2 children, Daniel, the oldest, and Emily. I raised them with love, with effort, with everything I could give them. I gave them education, a home, dignity. And in the last few years, I do not know what happened. They started drifting away. Daniel stopped visiting me. Emily came less and less, and when they came, it was always with complaints. "Dad, you are too much work. Dad, you are very stubborn. Dad, you do not know how to live alone." But that Sunday, Daniel appeared different, smiling. And I like a fool thought that finally my son had returned. I looked down and saw my backpack. It was still under my head. I had used it as a pillow before falling asleep, as I always did when we went to the countryside. It was old, worn out, but it was mine. And there it remained. I thought, how strange. If they left, why did they leave my backpack? Then I understood. They left it because it was under me. Because taking it meant waking me up. It meant that I would know what they were doing. They left it because they did not even bother trying to take it. I put my hand inside. There were some clothes, an extra shirt, an old sweater, and nothing else. My cell phone was not there. I had left it in the car because here in the mountains, there was no signal anyway. Next to me was the blanket where I had slept. I still felt the heat of my body on the fabric. And further away, the picnic tablecloth still spread on the grass. There were some food scraps, a piece of hard bread, half a smashed sandwich, a water bottle almost empty. I looked at them as if they were treasures, because in that moment, in the middle of that forest that was starting to get dark, that was all I had. I crawled to the tablecloth and grabbed the bread. It was dry, but I ate it anyway. I took a sip of water and put it away. I did not know how long I was going to need it. I did not know when I was going to have water again, or food, or anything. And then I remembered. During the picnic while we were eating, Sarah had said something. She said it casually. "Hey, Daniel, wouldn't it be nice if there was an ice cream shop nearby? We could go get a quick ice cream while Dad rests." Daniel laughed. "Yes, but first let's rest here too. We will see later." I did not pay attention to him at that moment. I thought it was just a conversation. But now, sitting there in the cold, starting to get dark, those words returned to my head. What if they had gone to get something? What if they just took longer than expected? What if they came back at any moment? My heart clung to that hope like a castaway to a plank. I decided not to move from there. I could not leave. What if they came back and I was not there? What if they looked for me and did not find me? No, I had to stay exactly where they had left me. I had to wait for them. I sat with my back against the tree, hugging my backpack, looking towards where I remembered they had parked the car. I waited and waited and kept waiting. The sun hid more and more. The shadows became long. The cold started to get into my old bones, but I did not move. I could not move. Because in my head they were going to come back. They had to come back. They were my family. Time in that forest was different. Every minute seemed like an hour. Every hour seemed like a whole day. I watched the sky change color. Orange, pink, violet, gray. And with every change my hope was fading a little more. But I did not let myself give up. I counted in my head. 100 more seconds and they appear. I counted to 100. They did not appear. Another 100. And nothing. My legs went numb. My back hurt. But I did not move. Because moving was accepting that they were not going to come back. And I was not ready to accept that yet. Every noise made me jump. A crunch in the bushes and my heart raced. It's them. But it was just an animal. The wind moved the branches, and I thought it was the car engine approaching. I stood up. I looked carefully. But it was nothing. Just the forest. Just nature mocking me. Once I heard something that sounded like footsteps. I stood up so fast I almost fell. "Daniel, Sarah," I screamed until my throat hurt. But no one answered. It was just the wind, or a deer, or my own desperation making me hear things that did not exist. Every sound was a broken promise. Every minute that passed was a new stab. I clung to any explanation. A tire got a flat. They got lost looking for the ice cream shop. Sarah felt sick, and they went to get help. My mind created stories to protect me from the truth that was already screaming in my chest. But I did not want to hear it. I could not hear it. Because listening to it meant accepting that my son, my own son, the boy I raised, that I carried in my arms, that I taught to walk, had left me here on purpose. And that was impossible. That could not be true. And then the night fell completely. The stars started to appear one by one. The cold became intense, and I was still there sitting against that tree, shivering, waiting. But there was no sunlight to give me hope anymore. There was no warmth to keep me awake. There was only darkness and silence. And that truth finally hit me like a punch in the stomach. They did not go to get ice cream. They did not get lost. They did not have an accident. They left. And they left me here knowing that I would probably never return. And that was when I cried for the first time. Not from fear, but from abandonment, from betrayal, from understanding that my own son had condemned me to die. When the morning light began to sneak through the trees, my legs were still asleep. I had not slept at all. I had only been there sitting shivering, waiting for a miracle that never came. My whole body hurt. My bones creaked when I tried to stand up. I was 81 years old, for God's sake. I was not made to spend the night on the ground in the cold, with nothing more than an old blanket. But something in me changed with that dawn light. It was no longer hope I felt. It was rage. Or maybe it was fear. Or both things together. I forced myself to stand up. I staggered a little. But I stayed standing, and I started to look. The first thing I looked for were the tire marks. There had to be marks. A car does not disappear without a trace. I walked around where I remembered they had parked. Nothing. I walked further. Neither. The ground was clean. Too clean. There were broken branches arranged on the ground. Dry leaves scattered in a strange way, and then I understood. They had erased the marks, on purpose, carefully, so I would not know which way they had gone, so I would get lost if I tried to follow them. My knees almost gave way when that truth fell on me. This was not an oversight. This was not an accident. This was planned. I stood there staring at the dirt where the car tracks should have been, and my head was spinning. The clearing where we had the picnic was large, and from it led, how many 3, 4 paths? I wasn't sure. I looked one way, then the other. All the paths looked the same. Dirt trees, more dirt, more trees. I tried to remember which one we had arrived on. I'd been half asleep during the drive back. No, wait. There was no drive back. I tried to remember which one we arrived on. But everything looked the same, and panic started climbing up my throat like a spider. I walked toward the path that looked widest to me. I looked for signs, anything, a moved stone, a broken branch, something, and there they were, fresh-cut branches arranged over the dirt. I walked to another path, the same. Cut branches, scattered leaves moved earth. I went to the third, also, to the fourth, same. Someone had worked on all the paths. All of them. They hadn't just erased where they went. They had erased all traces in all directions to confuse me, so I wouldn't even know where to start looking. My own son, my own daughter-in-law. They had planned every detail so I would get lost, so I would never find the way back. And the worst of all is that it worked. My cell phone. I didn't even have my cell phone. I had left it in the car because Daniel had told me there was no signal here. Don't bother bringing it, Dad. Nothing works here. And I believed him. Of course I believed him. He was my son. Why, but now, without a phone, without a way to call for help, without even knowing what time it was, I was completely lost. I went back to where I had slept. I picked up my backpack. I slung it on my back. I rolled up the blanket and tied it to the backpack. I grabbed the tablecloth with the food scraps and folded it carefully. That was all I had left in the world. As I walked back to the clearing, my eyes filled with tears, and I couldn't help remembering the trip here. 2 hours we had driven, 2 hours in which Daniel and Sarah talked the whole time. They seemed happy. Daniel drove. Sarah was in the passenger seat, and I was in the back looking at the landscape. They laughed. They told stories. "Do you remember when Dad took us camping and got lost?" Sarah said, and Daniel laughed. "Yes, we ended up sleeping in the car. And I laughed too, because I thought it was nice. I thought we were remembering happy moments. But now every laugh from that trip sounded different. In my memory. It sounded fake. It sounded cruel. We had gone up the Rockies. The air so clean it hurt to breathe it. It reminded me of when I was young and went walking with Elizabeth. She loved nature. She would tell me, "Arthur, the world is so big and so beautiful we can't stay locked up all the time." And I followed her wherever she went, to mountains, rivers, forests. And now in this same type of forest that she loved, I was lost, abandoned. I thought, "Elizabeth, if you are watching me from wherever you are, help me please." I remembered when we arrived. Daniel had said, "Look, Dad, what a perfect place." And yes, it was perfect. A clearing surrounded by tall trees. The sun came in rays between the leaves. There were wildflowers, butterflies. Sarah spread the tablecloth on the ground. She took out the sandwiches she had prepared. "I made your favorite Mr. Montgomery ham and cheese just how you like it." I felt loved. I felt important. We ate together. We talked. Daniel even took out his phone and took pictures of us. "Smile, Dad." And I smiled. I smiled like an idiot because I thought my son loved me again. I thought he had finally remembered that I existed. After eating, Daniel came over, put his hand on my shoulder, that gesture that used to mean love. "Dad, lie down for a moment. Rest. We are also going to rest for a while here under that other tree." And he said it so softly with such, how to say it, with such lies. They spread out blankets, one for them far away under another tree, and one for me here where I was now standing. I used my backpack as a pillow, like I always did. I closed my eyes and felt the sun warming my face. I thought how nice it is to be here with my family, and I fell asleep. Asleep from that bitter taste in the juice I had drunk. Asleep while they waited, waiting for me to sleep enough so they could leave without me noticing. And that gesture, that hand on my shoulder, that rest, Dad whispered with such sweetness. Now I saw it differently. Now I knew it wasn't affection. It was a goodbye. It was. Rest because it's the last thing you're going to do with us. It was. Rest because when you wake up, we are going to be very far from here. It was. Rest, you old fool, because you're never going to see us again. I fell on my knees, right there in the clearing, and I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since I buried Elizabeth. I cried for the son I thought I had. I cried for the man I was. And I cried for the man I had become. Someone so insignificant that his own family could leave him dumped in a forest as if he were garbage. I wiped my tears with the dirty sleeve of my shirt. I stood up again and looked at the paths, the 4 or 5 paths leading out of this clearing. One of them was where we had arrived. One of them would lead me back home. But which one I didn't know. And they knew it. They knew that without the marks, without a reference, without anything, I wouldn't know which path to take. That gesture of affection from my son, that hand on my shoulder, that rest Dad whispered with sweetness, had not been love. It had been the last lie before disappearing. It had been his way of saying goodbye without having to see my eyes when I realized the truth. I chose the path that seemed most traveled to me. I had no logical reason to choose it, just a hunch, a feeling. Maybe it was because the ground seemed a little more compact, or maybe it was just my desperation looking for something to cling to. I adjusted my backpack on my shoulders, grabbed the rolled blanket with one hand, and started walking. Every step hurt. My knees creaked. My back felt heavy. But I couldn't stay there waiting for death. I had to try. I had to look for a way out. I had to believe that there was still a way to go back home. Although deep in my heart, I was already starting to doubt that that house was still mine. I walked for hours, or at least that's what it seemed to me. No watch, no phone, nothing to measure time. I could only guide myself by the sun. I watched it move slowly across the sky, from one side to the other, rising, falling. The path was irregular. Sometimes it seemed well defined with compact dirt and clear edges, but after a while it started to blur. The edges became fuzzy. The bushes invaded, and little by little what had been a path began to turn into nothing. Just wilderness. Just trees. Just wild nature that didn't care if I lived or died. My heart started beating faster. This can't be. There has to be a path. But I kept going, because in the distance between the trees I thought I saw something, an opening, a clarity. Maybe it was another road. Maybe it was a house. Maybe it was civilization. I clung to that hope like a madman. I pushed the branches that blocked my way. I scraped my arms with thorns. I tripped over roots. But I didn't stop. I had to get to that light. I had to see what it was. Because if it was nothing, if it was just my imagination, then I was truly lost. I was panting. My heart was beating in my ears. My legs were shaking. But I kept going. I kept going until I finally reached that clearing I had seen. And when I arrived, when I saw what it really was, something inside me broke. It wasn't a road. It wasn't a house. It was nothing. Just another piece of forest. Trees, more trees, dirt, rocks, silence. I let myself fall to my knees. The blanket fell from my hands. The backpack slid off my shoulders. And for a moment, just for a moment, I wanted to give up right there. I wanted to lie down on that cold earth and let everything end. 81 years. 81 years of life, of work, of effort. And for what? To end up abandoned in a forest by my own son. To die alone, scared lost, I closed my eyes. And I thought of Elizabeth, of her smile, of her voice telling me, "Arthur, you are strong. You have always been strong." I opened my backpack with trembling hands. I took out the tablecloth where the picnic leftovers remained. The bread was already harder than a stone. I bit it anyway. It hurt my gums, but I swallowed it. The half-smashed sandwich tasted like cardboard, but I ate it. Every crumb, every little piece, because I didn't know when I would eat again. I took a sip of water from the bottle. Just a sip. I had to ration it. But my throat was so dry, I wanted to drink more. I forced myself to close the bottle, to put it away. I looked at what was left. Almost nothing. Maybe half a pint. How long can an 81-year-old man survive with half a pint of water? I didn't want to know the answer. The sun started to go down faster than I expected. Or maybe it was just my perception. Time in that forest was strange. Sometimes it seemed eternal. Sometimes it seemed to run like sand between fingers. The shadows lengthened. The golden light turned orange, then pink, then violet. And then I understood. I was going to spend another night here, another night in this green hell. I looked for a place to stop, a large tree with thick roots that formed like a small shelter. I sat there, I spread the blanket, and I waited. I waited for the night to swallow me again. But this time I knew what was coming, and the fear was worse than the first night. When the darkness fell completely, the sound started. First, it was a howl, distant, prolonged. It froze my blood. Wolves, coyotes, I didn't know. Then it was cracks, branches breaking, something big moving among the bushes. My breathing accelerated. I grabbed a thick branch I found on the ground, as if that was going to protect me from anything. And then I heard something that made me want to scream. A roar. Deep, low, wild. It was far away, but not far enough. There were bears in the Rockies. Everyone knew that. What if one of them found me? What if right now I was being watched by eyes I couldn't see in the dark? I tried to make a fire. With hands that were shaking so much I could barely hold anything, I gathered dry twigs. I looked for stones. I tried to remember how it was done. I'd seen documentaries. I had read books. But never in my life had I needed to make fire for real. I rubbed 2 stones. Nothing. I tried with 2 sticks. Nothing. My hands were sweating despite the cold. The branches slipped from me. My eyes filled with tears of frustration. And after half an hour of trying to fail again and again, I simply gave up. I wrapped myself in the blanket. I curled up against the tree, and I prepared for the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. Not a second. Every noise was a threat. Every shadow was a predator. Every gust of wind was something approaching. My mind played tricks on me. I saw shapes among the trees, glowing, eyes, teeth, claws. I told myself it was my imagination, but my heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. What if I died tonight? What if an animal attacked me and no one ever found my body? What if I became one more of those cases of people who disappear in the forests, and no one ever knows what happened to them? My children. Daniel and Sarah would tell the story. Yes, we went for a picnic with Dad. He fell asleep, and when we woke up, he was gone. He must have gotten lost, and no one would know the truth. At some point in that endless night, I started talking. Alone, out loud, because the silence was worse than any noise. Please, Lord, I whispered, looking at the stars I could barely see between the treetops. Don't let me die here. Not like this. Not abandoned like a dog. Please, my voice broke. What did I do to deserve this? I worked all my life. I was a good father, or at least I tried to be. Where did I go wrong? At what moment did I lose my children? Tears ran down my face. Elizabeth, my love, if you can hear me, help me. I don't know what to do. I'm so tired, so scared. I don't want to die like this. And when the sun finally started to peek over the horizon, when the first rays of light pierced the darkness, I opened my eyes and wondered if I was still alive. My body was numb, so cold I couldn't feel my toes, so stiff that when I tried to move, every muscle screamed in pain. I stood up slowly like a ghost rising from his grave, and while I looked at that forest, extending infinitely in all directions, I wondered how much longer can I resist. 2 days, 3. Or was it already too late, and I was just walking toward my death? The second day dawned with a different pain. It wasn't just the body anymore. It was something deeper, more urgent. My stomach hurt. It burned, it twisted, as if I had something alive inside trying to get out. Hunger. Real hunger. Not like when you skip breakfast and feel uncomfortable, but hunger that eats you from the inside, that makes you think about food all the time. Bread, rice, beans, anything. I stood up, staggering. My head was spinning. I had to find something to eat, whatever it was, because if I didn't eat soon, my body was simply going to shut down, and me with it. I grabbed the water bottle, shook it almost empty. Maybe 2 sips left. 3 if I was careful. I uncapped the bottle and wet my lips. Only that. I didn't allow myself to drink more. My tongue felt like sandpaper, dry rough. It hurt even to swallow saliva. I looked around, searching for some sign of water, a stream, a river, something, but I only saw trees, and more trees, and more trees. I kept the bottle in my backpack as if it were gold, because at that moment it was. It was the difference between living one more day or giving up right there. And although part of me wanted to give up, another part, a stubborn and old and obstinate part, was not ready to die yet. I started looking for fruits, anything edible. I looked at the bushes. There were some small red berries. I grabbed them with trembling hands. I put them in my mouth and almost spit them out immediately. Bitter, horribly bitter. Like eating soap mixed with dirt. But I swallowed them anyway because I didn't know when I would find something else. I kept walking, looking. I found other berries. These were purple. I tasted them. Worse. My stomach churned. I bent over and vomited the little I had eaten. I fell to my knees, gasping with my mouth full of that acidic taste. And at that moment, I remembered something that broke my heart. My library, my small library in the city. I had almost 2,000 books. I had collected them all my life. Novels, poetry, history, philosophy. Each book was a treasure. Each shelf told a story of my years as a professor. Students gave me books when they graduated. Thank you, Professor Montgomery. You changed my life, and I kept them all. I arranged them with love. I read and reread them. My ranch wasn't big, but it was mine. A beautiful house with a garden, with a room full of books from floor to ceiling, with windows facing the mountains. It was my refuge, my peace. And now, lying in this forest, dying and abandoned, I wondered who will keep my books. Will they sell them? Will they throw them in the trash? My children had started to drift away years ago. First, it was the visits that got shorter. Daniel would arrive, have a quick coffee, and leave. I have things to do, Dad. Later, the calls, they never returned. I left them messages. My son, I just wanted to know how you are. Nothing. Silence. And then Emily started with the hints. Dad, this house is too big for you alone. Wouldn't something smaller be better? Translation, sell it and distribute the money. Or when she said at your age, Dad, one needs help. Translation, you are already a burden. Little by little, I became a nuisance, something that had to be resolved, a problem, waiting for a solution, and I felt it. My God, how I felt it. And Oliver, Emily's husband, that man, looked at me as if I were an old piece of furniture in the way, cold, calculating, always with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Montgomery, have you thought about making a will? He would ask me, just like that, as if he were asking about the weather. At your age, it is important to have everything in order, and I ignored him because I didn't like how it sounded. I didn't like how he looked at me when he talked about ordering things. Once I heard him talking on the phone. He thought I didn't hear him, but I did. He won't last much longer, he said. Just like that, so casual as if my life were a clock that only had a few chimes left. I sat against a tree and closed my eyes and spoke. Like a madman, like an old fool lost in the forest. Elizabeth, I whispered. Elizabeth, my love. Where are you? I need you. My voice trembled. The children, our children. What happened to them? At what moment did they become like this? I squeezed my eyes shut. You always said Daniel was good, that he had a noble heart. Where is that heart now? The wind moved the leaves, and for a second, just for a second, I thought I heard her voice. Get up, Arthur. Don't give up. But when I opened my eyes, it was just the forest, just me, just my infinite loneliness. And I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not for the hunger, not for the cold, not for the fear of dying. I cried for the abandonment, for the betrayal, for realizing that the two people I had loved most in the world after Elizabeth had left me thrown away like garbage. I cried because all my life I had worked to give them a future, and they paid me with this. I cried because I had been a fool, an old fool who believed that family love was unconditional. But it wasn't. It never was. And now when I finally understood it, it was already too late. I wiped my tears with the sleeve of my shirt, but they kept coming out, and I let them run. And then I thought of something, my properties. I had 3 rental houses in the city. I had the ranch. I had savings. I wasn't rich, but not poor either. And suddenly, everything made sense. That's why Daniel appeared that Sunday smiling. That's why the picnic. That's why the fake kindness. They didn't love me. They wanted what I had. They wanted me to disappear so they could keep everything without waiting, without asking my permission, without having to take care of me in my old age, just eliminate me as if I were an obstacle in their plans, as if my life were worth nothing compared to a few houses and a few dollars. And that truth hit me harder than any hunger or cold. I stood up again. I didn't know where to go. I had lost all sense of direction. The sun was up somewhere, but I didn't know if I was going north, south, east, or west. I only knew I had to keep moving because staying still was dying. I grabbed my backpack, slung the blanket, and started walking aimlessly without hope, just to walk. My legs moved automatically 1 foot in front of the other, like a zombie, like a walking dead man who still doesn't accept that it's all over. And while I walked, I thought, maybe this is what I deserve. Maybe I did something so terrible in my life that God is punishing me like this. And then I saw it in the distance between the trees, a structure, walls, roof, a cabin. My heart jumped so hard, my chest hurt. There was someone there. There had to be someone. A hunter, a ranger, someone who could help me, someone who could get me out of this hell. I looked down, rocks, exposed roots, loose dirt. Every step was going to be dangerous. But up in that small clearing was the cabin, and maybe inside there was someone who could save me. Maybe there was food, water, a phone I couldn't give up now. Not when I was so close. I looked for a spot to go, down, grabbed a thick branch to support myself, and started descending slowly, praying not to fall. The first step went well, the second too, but on the third, my foot slipped. The dirt crumbled beneath me. I fell sitting down, hitting my back against a rock. The pain went through me like a knife. I screamed or tried to scream. Only a choked moan came out. I rolled a little further down before being able to grab a root. I stayed there, hanging, gasping with my heart racing for a moment. I thought it's over. I'm going to die here in this stupid ravine, meters from being able to ask for help. But then I looked up. The cabin was still there waiting for me, and something inside me, something stubborn and foolish that refused to die, made me continue. I crawled, I got up and kept going down. I reached the bottom with my hands bleeding. I had scrapes on my arms, my shirt torn, but I was alive. And I was closer now. I just had to go up a little. On the other side of the ravine, it was easier. There were more rocks to support myself, more roots, and when I finally reached the level of the cabin, when I put my feet on flat ground again, I almost cried with relief. I had made it. I was here. I walked the last meters separating me from the door. My hand trembled when I raised it to knock. "Hello," I said, with a weak voice. "Is anyone here?" I knocked on the wooden door. It sounded hollow empty, and a bad feeling started growing in my stomach. I pushed the door. It creaked. A long, horrible sound, like a lament. It opened slowly, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. Mold, dampness, something rotten. I took a step inside. Hello, I repeated, although I already knew the answer. No one answered me, because there was no one. The cabin was empty, abandoned. I looked around, letting my eyes get used to the gloom. The windows were dirty, some broken. The light entering was dim, ghostly. And then I saw the real state of the place, and my heart sank to the floor. It wasn't a shelter. It was a tomb. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Giant cobwebs hung from the ceiling. Beams like macabre curtains in a corner. There was what was once a table now. Just rotten wood legs broken, tilted to one side. An old chair was overturned on the floor, and against the wall, a rusty cot with a mattress that looked like it had been eaten by mice or by something worse. I took another step inside. The wooden floor creaked under my weight, and that sound, that deep creak, gave me goosebumps. How long had this cabin been abandoned? Years, decades. It felt like no one had been here in an eternity. I walked further inside, stepping carefully. There was a small kitchen, or what was left of it, a rusty sink, cupboards, without doors, full of cobwebs. I checked the cupboards looking for something, anything canned, food, bottled water, anything. But they were empty, completely empty, just dust and more cobwebs. I turned around and saw a fireplace, old ashes cold dead, since who knows how long. Next to it, some pieces of firewood, so old they crumbled when touched. This place wasn't going to save me. This place was as dead as I was soon going to be, and that realization hit me like a slap. And then I heard something, a creak, but it wasn't the floor under my feet. It came from above, from the ceiling. I froze. Another creak. Something was moving up there. An animal, a raccoon, bats. I didn't want to know. But then I heard something else, a scraping, like claws dragging on wood. My breathing accelerated. I took a step back, and at that moment, something fell from the ceiling. Something dark, fast. I screamed. I ducked, and the thing flew past my head before disappearing through a broken window. A bird. Just a damn bird. But my heart beat so hard, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I tried to calm down, breathe. But then I saw it, running across the floor, huge, the size of a small cat. A rat, fat gray, with red eyes that looked at me for a second before squealing and running toward a hole in the wall. I screamed again. I couldn't help it, and my scream made other things move. I heard squeaks, several. There were more, many more. This cabin was infested, and I was inside with them. I ran toward the door, but in my haste, I tripped over the fallen chair. I fell to the floor. My hands touched something wet, something viscous. I didn't want to see what it was. I just got up and kept going toward the exit. But before reaching the door, the floor creaked differently, louder, deeper, and I felt it give a little under my feet. I froze. The boards were rotten if I kept walking. If I put more weight, they could break. And underneath, I didn't know what was underneath an empty dirt basement. I took a slow step, careful to one side. The floor creaked again, a board split. Not completely, but enough for my foot to sink a little. I panicked. I jumped toward the door, and thank God I made it. I left that cabin as if all the demons of hell were chasing me outside, under the sun. I took a deep breath, but I didn't feel better, because now I had a new reality to face. There was no one who could help me. This cabin that had been my hope was just another reminder that I was completely alone. I looked back. The cabin looked worse from outside, now that I knew what was inside the tilted walls. The roof with holes, the windows like empty eyes staring at nothing for a moment. I thought about staying. Sleeping inside there, at least I would have walls, a roof over my head. But I couldn't. That cabin wasn't a shelter. It was a trap, and if I slept there, maybe I would never wake up. I ran out of that cursed place as if the devil himself lived there. And while I moved away, while I left that sinister cabin behind, a part of me wondered, maybe the devil did live there. Maybe this whole mountain range was cursed. Maybe I was cursed. because every time I thought there was a way out, that there was hope. Something took it away from me. The cabin wasn't my salvation. It was just another cruel joke of fate, another reminder that I wasn't going to get out of here alive, and that truth, that horrible truth, began to settle in my heart, like ice. How many days had I been lost? 3, 4. I wasn't sure anymore. Days blended together. Nights were eternal. And hunger. God, hunger was something alive devouring me from the inside. It wasn't just the stomach anymore. It was the whole body, screaming for food. My head hurt. My hands shook when I closed my eyes. I saw food, tacos, rice, and beans. The sweet bread I bought at the bakery near my house. My mouth filled with saliva just thinking about it. But when I opened my eyes, there were only trees, and hunger, and more hunger that was never going to end. I had left the cabin behind hours ago, or maybe it was yesterday. I didn't know. Time didn't mean anything anymore. I just walked one foot in front of the other, because if I stopped moving, I knew I would never get up again. And then in the distance I saw something that made me stop dead. A figure. A man, a real human being. Not a hallucination. Not an animal. A man with clothes walking among the trees. My heart stopped, then started beating so fast I thought it was going to explode. "Hey!" I tried to shout, but my voice came out weak, broken. Yet the man didn't hear me. He kept walking. "Moving away, please!" I shouted louder, using all the energy I had left. "Help me. I'm lost." The man stopped, turned around, saw me. Our eyes met across the distance, and for a beautiful moment, I thought, I'm saved. He's going to help me. He's going to get me out of here. The man took a step toward me, then another. He was approaching. My soul sang with relief. I was going to live. I was going to get out of this hell. I started walking toward him too, hurrying, tripping over roots but not caring, because finally I had found help. Finally, everything was going to be okay, but then the man stopped. We were about 20 yards apart, close enough for me to see his expression, and what I saw froze my blood. It wasn't compassion, it wasn't concern, it was fear. He looked at me as if I were something dangerous, as if I were a threat. "Please." I begged again, raising my hands to show him. I wasn't dangerous. I just need help. I'm lost. They left me here. But the man backed away, took a step back, then another. And then without saying a single word, he turned around and ran as if I were a monster, as if I were death itself chasing him. "No. Wait. Please don't go." I ran after him. With all the strength I had left. With all the strength. I didn't have. My legs moved. But it was like running in a dream. Slow, heavy. The man was younger. Faster. He disappeared among the trees in seconds. But I kept running. I kept screaming, "Come back. Just help me get out of here." My lungs burned. My heart hurt. My vision blurred, but I couldn't stop. It was my only chance, my only one. And then I tripped. I fell to my knees. I tried to get up, but my legs didn't respond. And I stayed there on the ground, gasping, crying like a lost child in a supermarket. Tears ran down my dirty face. Sobs shook my body. And it wasn't a silent cry. It was a desperate, broken cry of someone who knows he just lost his last chance to live. Why I moaned looking at the sky. Why did he run? I just needed help, but I knew why. I probably looked horrible. A dirty old man with torn clothes, with a grown beard, with crazy eyes. I looked like a vagrant or something worse. And that man was afraid. He was afraid of me when I could finally breathe again. When finally the tears dried, I realized something horrible. I had left my backpack behind. In the haste of running after the man, I had dropped it, and now I didn't know where it was. I stood up, staggering. Looked around. Everything looked the same. Where had I come from? In what direction had I run? I started walking back, or at least I thought it was back. But after a few minutes, nothing seemed familiar to me. I walked in another direction, neither. I started to panic. The backpack had the blanket. It had the tablecloth. It had the last bits of food left. Without it, I had nothing. Absolutely nothing. I started walking in circles, searching, desperate. It has to be around here. I told myself it has to be, but I couldn't find it. Just trees and more trees and terror growing in my chest, and then I saw it on the ground a few yards from me, coiled on a stone huge as thick as my arm, with dark patterns on its skin shining in the sunlight, a snake, and it was looking at me. Its tongue went in and out, its cold eyes unblinking. Fixed on me, I froze. I couldn't move a muscle. I couldn't breathe. I could only look at that creature that could kill me with a single bite. Was it poisonous? Probably would it attack me if I moved. I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. We stayed like that, looking at each other in absolute silence. I prayed in my head. Please, God, please not like this. I don't want to die like this. The snake moved slowly, sliding over the stone, going down to the ground, moving toward me. No, to the side, toward the bushes. It disappeared among the leaves, making no noise, and only then, only when I was sure it was gone, I let out the air I had been holding. My legs almost gave way. I grabbed a tree so as not to fall. My heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had been seconds from death, inches, and something in my mind broke a little more. How many more times was I going to escape? How many more times was I going to get lucky before I ran out? I kept looking for my backpack, but already without much hope. And then I saw something up in a tree. Fruits? They looked like oranges, but smaller. My stomach roared. I had to eat. I had to eat something, or I was going to faint. I approached the tree. It was tall. The fruits were on the upper branches, but there was no option. I had to climb. I looked for a support point, put my foot on a knot in the trunk, grabbed a low branch, and started climbing. Slow, careful, my arms trembled, but I kept going up a little more, just a little more. I almost reached them. I stretched my hand toward the nearest fruit. My fingers brushed it, and then the branch under my foot broke. I fell. The world spun. I saw the sky, then the ground, then the sky again, and then I hit. Hard pain exploded in my left leg, a pain so intense I couldn't scream. I just lay there with my mouth open, unable to breathe, with my whole body in agony, when finally I could inhale the scream. Came out long, desperate, full of pain. My leg, something was very wrong with my leg. I tried to move it, and I almost fainted from the pain. I looked down. It was swelling fast. I looked for the picnic tablecloth I still carried in my belt, with trembling hands. I tore a piece, and while I wrapped my leg with the cloth, while I tightened with all my strength, ignoring the pain that made me see stars, I thought, today I am going to die here. And maybe it is better this way. If you are listening to my story, please tell me in the comments where you are watching us from. Sometimes knowing there are people in the world who understand what I lived gives me strength to continue. I don't know how long I lay there after the fall. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The pain in my leg was so intense that everything else disappeared. I had tied the towel cloth as tight as I could, but the leg kept throbbing. Every beat of my heart sent a wave of pain up my whole leg to my hip. I tried to stand up. It was a mistake. The scream that came out of my throat scared the birds in the nearby trees. I couldn't walk. I could barely move. And in that moment, lying in the dirt, like a wounded animal, I understood that this was the end. There was no way I was getting out of here walking, but I couldn't stay here waiting for death either. I started crawling with my elbows, using my hands to grab root stones. Anything that helped me advance. I dragged the bad leg behind me like a dead weight. Every meter I advanced was torture. Dirt got under my nails. Stones scraped my forearms. My shirt tore, but I kept moving, because if I stopped, if I accepted that I couldn't anymore, then it would all be over. And a part of me, a stubborn and foolish part, still refused to give up, still want to live. Although I didn't know very well why, anymore, what to live for, if my own children had abandoned me. Why return to a house that probably wasn't mine anymore? I had completely lost count of the days. Time had ceased to exist. There were no clocks. There was no way to know if it was Tuesday or Sunday. Everything mixed in my head. Nights and days were equally horrible, equally endless. I remembered sleeping under that tree the first night. I remembered the cabin. I remembered the man who fled from me. But when had each thing been? Yesterday, 3 days ago. My mind was confused, clouded as if I were seeing everything through dirty glass, and that scared me more than the pain, because it meant my body was shutting down, that I was reaching the limit of what I could withstand, and that limit was very, very close. Thirst was worse than hunger. Now, much worse, hunger hurt. But thirst drives you crazy. My tongue had stuck to the roof of my mouth. My lips were cracked, bleeding. Every time I tried to swallow, I felt like I had glass in my throat. My mouth tasted like copper, like blood, like death. And while I crawled, while my hands searched for something to cling to keep advancing, I heard something that made me stop. A sound, weak, distant, but unmistakable water. Running water, a stream or a river or a hallucination of my desperate mind. But I had to find out. I had to get there. Even if it cost me the last strength I had left, I started crawling faster. I didn't care about the pain anymore. I didn't care about anything except getting to that water. My elbows bled, my hands were raw, but I kept advancing. The sound became stronger, clearer. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. There was water ahead, and with every meter I advanced, with every second that passed, that sound became my only reason to stay alive. I reached a slope steep, and below, shining under the sun, I saw the reflection of water, a stream small but real. As real as my desperation, I let myself roll down the slope. I didn't care about hitting myself. I didn't care about anything. I just wanted to get to that water. When I reached the bank, I dragged myself to the very edge, put my face in the water, and drank. I drank like an animal, desperately, without stopping. The water was freezing so cold my teeth hurt, but I didn't stop. I kept drinking until I choked, coughed, spit, and drank again. The water filled my empty stomach, made me feel nauseous, but I didn't care. I drank until physically I couldn't take more, and then I stayed there with half my body in the water, gasping, feeling how the cold numbed me but not caring, because I had water. Finally, I had water, and that in that moment was the only thing that mattered in the world. The freezing water burned my throat. I know it sounds strange, water that burns, but that's how it felt, as if I were swallowing cold fire. Every sip was a mixture of relief and agony. My throat was so dry, so hurt, that the water irritated it more. But I couldn't stop, after days without anything more than a few sips. My body needed it, even if it hurt. I put my hands in the water and brought them to my face. The cold water ran down my cheeks, down my neck. I washed my eyes, my mouth, and for a moment, just for a moment, I felt almost human again, almost alive, almost as if there was hope. I looked at my leg. It was swollen purple. The cloth I had tied was stained with dry blood and dirt. I had to clean it. I had to see how bad it was with trembling hands. I started untying the cloth. Every movement sent waves of pain when finally I removed it. What I saw scared me. The skin was broken in several places. There was a deep cut on the calf, and the whole leg was swollen. Double its normal size, I put the leg in the water, carefully, and screamed. The cold on the wound was like putting the leg in acid. Tears sprang from my eyes, but I left the leg there, because I knew I had to clean it, even if it hurt, even if it made me want to faint. And then while I was sitting there on the bank of that stream, with my legs submerged in freezing water, feeling the pain throb in every fiber of my body, vision started to blur, the edges of my sight darkened. The world started to spin slowly. I tried to grab onto something, but my hands didn't respond. I was dehydrated, wounded, exhausted. I had gone days without eating anything substantial, without sleeping well, without resting. My body had held on until here. But now that, finally, I had water. Now that, finally, I had something I needed. My body decided it couldn't any more, that it was time to give up. And I didn't have strength to fight against that. I lay back on the bank. The ground was cold and wet, but I didn't care. I looked at the sky, the clouds moving slowly, the trees swaying with the wind. Everything looked beautiful, suddenly calm, peaceful, as if nature were telling me, rest. You did enough. You suffered enough. My eyes closed on their own. I tried to keep them open, but it was useless. Fatigue was stronger than my will, and while I felt consciousness slipping away, while the world faded slowly, I thought of Elizabeth, of her smile, of how she told me everything was going to be okay, and I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe it was going to be okay, but I didn't know if I was going to wake up again when I closed my eyes there on the bank of that stream, with the sound of the water running beside me, with the cold of the earth penetrating my bones. I felt something strange, peace, for the first time in days. I felt peace, because if this was the end, if I died here in this place, at least I would die, with water nearby. At least I would die in a beautiful place, and I wouldn't have to face my children again. I wouldn't have to see their faces when they realized I had survived, because I knew, deep in my heart, that they didn't want me to survive. I closed my eyes completely, and I thought, thank God, finally it's going to end. The voices reached me first before being able to open my eyes, before being able to move voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Guttural sounds, words that mixed with the noise of the water. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, or that I was already dead, and this was what came after. But then I felt something, hands touching me, real hands, warm, touching my shoulder. My arm. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids weighed like stones. I tried to speak, but only a moan came out. The voices became louder, more voices joined, and I felt more hands touching me. How many people were there? Where was I? What was happening? Finally, I managed to open my eyes, and the first thing I saw were faces, dark faces, looking at me from above. 3, 4, 5 people standing around me. Men with long hair, bronzed skin, simple clothes. They looked at me with expressions I couldn't decipher, concern, curiosity, fear. I tried to speak. Again, please, I murmured. But my voice came out so weak that not even I heard it. One of the men crouched next to me, looked me in the eyes, said something in that strange language. And although I didn't understand the words, the tone was soft, as if he were talking to a scared child, as if he were telling me everything was going to be okay. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. My body didn't respond. It was as if my muscles had disconnected from my brain. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask for help, to explain what had happened to me, but the voice didn't come out just air, just a hoarse gasp. My throat was so hurt that although the water had moistened it, I still couldn't produce sounds. One of the men said something to another, pointed at my leg. The others approached. I saw their expressions change when they saw the state of my leg. One of them whistled. Another shook his head. And I knew it was bad, very bad, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. At least someone had found me. The hands touched me again, but this time it wasn't just to examine me. They were lifting me. I felt arms under my knees, under my back. Wait, I tried to say, but I didn't have strength to resist. I didn't have strength for anything. They lifted me, as if I weighed nothing. And maybe it was true. Maybe I had lost so much weight in these days that I really weighed nothing. They held me between 2 men. My head hung to one side. I saw the ground moving beneath me. I saw my feet dragging, and I understood. They were taking me somewhere where I didn't know. Were they saving me? Or was I in more danger? My mind was too confused to process everything while they carried me. While they took me, who knows where, I didn't have strength to resist. Not even if I had wanted to. My body was like a rag doll, without bones, without will. I just let them take me. And while they did, I wondered, is this better or worse? Would I prefer to die alone in that stream, in peace, without more suffering, or was this better? Being rescued by strangers who spoke a language I didn't understand, who could be taking me anywhere, who could have any intention. But I had no choice. I had no choice in anything anymore. I could only let myself go and hope that God, if He was still listening to my prayers, had some plan for me. Through my blurred vision, I started to see things. Structures, houses small, made of wood, and something that looked like mud or straw. Low roofs, unpainted walls. And then I saw more people. Children running barefoot, women with long and colorful skirts, old people sitting on the ground. Everyone watched us pass. Some pointed, others talked among themselves in that strange language. The children approached, curious, but the mothers pulled them back as if I were dangerous, as if I were something they shouldn't touch. And in the center of everything, a bonfire big, with smoke rising toward the gray sky. This was a settlement, a village, but not like the ones I knew. This was different, primitive, isolated from the modern world. One of the men said something, and in his phrase I heard a word that repeated, Highwood. He said it several times. Highwood. Highwood was it the name of the place, the name of his tribe? I wasn't sure, but I engraved that word in my mind, just in case I ever got out of here and needed to tell someone where I had been. The Highwood clan, whoever they were. They had found me when I was about to die, and now they were taking me to their village to help me to cure me. Oh, I didn't want to think about the other possibilities, about the stories I had heard of isolated communities, of strangers who never returned. My heart beat fast, but I couldn't do anything except let myself be taken. They took me inside one of the houses. It was small. Dark, smelled of wood smoke, and something else I couldn't identify. They placed me on something on the ground, a mat, or maybe an animal skin. I couldn't see well, my eyes closed on their own. I felt them settling me, putting something under my head, something soft, like an improvised pillow. And for a moment, for a strange and confused moment, I felt safe, as if these people, although I didn't know them, although I couldn't understand them, really wanted to help me. Or maybe it was just my desperation, wanting to believe there was still goodness in the world. After what my own children had done to me, I needed to believe that someone could be good. A woman approached, older, with gathered gray hair. She carried something in her hands. A gourd or a bowl full of water. She knelt next to me and brought it to my lips. Drink, she seemed to say with her gestures. Although I didn't understand her words, I opened my mouth and she tilted the container. The water fell on my tongue. Fresh, clean, better than any water I had tasted in my life. I drank slowly. She waited patient, and when I finished, she wiped my mouth with a rag, with such sweetness, such care that tears started running down my face, because it had been so long since anyone treated me with tenderness. So long since anyone worried if I was okay or not, and this strange woman who didn't know me, who owed me nothing, was taking care of me as if I were her own father. I looked around the house, the wooden walls, the straw roof, the light entering through small openings, and I started to understand these people had saved me. They had found me dying by the stream, and instead of leaving me there, instead of ignoring me, they had brought me to their village. They had given me shelter, water care. Why I didn't know, maybe for kindness, maybe for compassion, or maybe they had their own reasons. But in that moment, lying on that mat, with my body destroyed and my soul broken, I didn't care. I was just grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful not to be alone. Grateful that someone, at least someone in this cruel world, had extended their hand. But while I closed my eyes, while I let exhaustion take me again, a question settled in my mind, a question I couldn't ignore. Had they saved me, or had I fallen into another type of danger? These people spoke a language I didn't understand, lived in a way I didn't know, were isolated from the modern world. And I was completely at their mercy, unable to walk, unable to communicate, with no way to escape if I wanted to. What were they going to do with me? Were they going to help me return home, or did they have other plans for me? And while sleep overcame me, while darkness wrapped me again, that question remained floating in the air without answer. I woke up, I do not know how many hours later, or maybe days. Time in that place did not exist as I knew it. There were no clocks. There were no windows with a view of the street, just the light entering through the cracks in the wooden walls, and the constant sound of voices outside, voices speaking that strange language. I tried to sit up, and the pain in my leg reminded me why I was there. I looked around more carefully now. The house was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet. The walls were made of old boards tied with something that looked like vines. The roof was dried straw. In one corner there were clay pots. In another, folded blankets. And I was in the center on this mat that smelled of earth and smoke, feeling more vulnerable than ever in my life. I heard movement outside, and then the door opened. It was not a door like the ones I knew. It was just a heavy cloth hanging from a stick. It slid to the side, and 3 men entered. The same ones who had found me, I think, or maybe others. I was not sure. They stood looking at me, and I looked at them. They started talking among themselves. Fast, guttural words, full of sounds I had never heard. One pointed at my leg. Another shook his head. The third said something that sounded like a question, and the other 2 answered. They were discussing. About me. But I had no idea what they were saying, and that terrified me more than anything. "What are you saying?" I asked, with a hoarse voice. The 3 looked at me. One of them answered me, in his language, words that meant nothing to me. "I do not understand," I said, moving my hands. "I do not speak. I do not know what language that is." They looked at each other. One spoke again. Slower this time, as if speaking slower was going to make me magically understand. But it did not work. "What are you going to do with me?" I asked, feeling the panic rise up my throat. "I just need help to return to my house, to Denver." "Do you know Denver?" But their faces showed no recognition. They just looked at me as if I were the one speaking the strange language, as if I were the foreigner here, and I suppose I was. One of the men crouched next to me. He stared at me, and in his eyes I saw something that froze me. Mistrust, or maybe suspicion. He said something. His tone was severe, hard. The other 2 nodded, and then I understood. They thought I was a threat, but how I was an 81-year-old man wounded at their mercy. What threat could I represent? Or maybe they thought I was someone from the government. Someone coming to bother them. I had heard stories. Stories of indigenous communities living isolated because they did not trust the outside world, because the outside world had hurt them. And now I, a stranger, had appeared in their territory, without invitation, without explanation. Of course they were suspicious. I tried to explain myself with gestures. I pointed at my leg. I acted as if I were walking with my fingers. Then I acted as if I fell. I pointed outside toward where I had come from. I tried to make the gesture of a car, of driving. But they only looked at me confused. One of them said something to another, and they laughed. It was not a cruel laugh exactly, but it was not friendly either. It was the laugh of someone who does not understand what the other is trying to say. The laugh of total misunderstanding. And I felt so frustrated, so desperate that I wanted to scream. I wanted to make them understand. But there was no way. We were separated by something more than a language. We were separated by completely different worlds. My leg throbbed. The pain was constant, sharp, unbearable. The cloth I had tied was still there, dirty, stained with dried blood. No one had touched it. No one had tried to cure it. And I started to wonder. Are they going to let me die here? Did they bring me only so I would not die in their stream? To avoid problems, I looked at the men with pleading eyes. I pointed at my leg again. "It hurts," I said, although I knew they did not understand. "It hurts a lot. Please." One of them looked at the leg. I saw his expression change, as if he just realized the state it was in. He said something to the others, but none did anything. They just nodded. and left, all three, leaving me alone again. And I stayed there wondering if they were going to come back, or if they had left me there to die slowly. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I did not know. And then the door moved again. A woman entered, elderly, maybe my age or older. She had white hair tied in a long braid, skin full of wrinkles deep as furrows in the earth. She wore a long skirt and an embroidered blouse. She approached me slowly. She looked at me, and in her eyes I did not see compassion. I saw mistrust. She said something. Her voice was rough, hard. She crouched and grabbed my arm, with force. She lifted my sleeve and looked at my skin, as if she were looking for something. Marks, tattoos, I do not know. Then she looked at my face, my hands, my torn clothes, and all the time she murmured things in her language, things that sounded like complaints, like accusations, and I did not know what to do. I just stayed still, letting her examine me, praying for it to end soon. The old woman left, and more men came. 5 this time, maybe 6. They formed a semicircle around me, and they started to discuss. No, discuss is little. They were arguing heatedly. They raised their voices. They pointed at me. One made broad gestures with his hands. Another shook his head violently. A third hit his fist against his palm. And I was there, in the center of everything, without understanding a single word, but understanding everything. They were deciding what to do with me. And by their tones, by their expressions, not everyone agreed. Some maybe wanted to help me. Others maybe wanted. I did not want to think about what they wanted. I only knew that my life was in their hands, and I had no voice in the decision. I had nothing. Night fell. I knew it because the light entering through the cracks disappeared. The house remained in gloom. Someone had left some food, a hard flatbread, a little water in a gourd. I ate and drank, although my stomach churned with fear. Outside I heard voices. The bonfire must have been lit, because I saw the orange glow filtering through the walls. I heard laughter, conversations, normal life for them. But for me, every sound was a potential threat. Would they come for me in the night? Would they decide I was too dangerous to let live? I could not sleep. Not a second. I stayed awake all night, with my eyes open, watching the entrance, waiting for the cloth to move, waiting for the worst. I survived the forest. I survived hunger, the cold, the snake, the fall, to die here in the hands of people who did not even know me. The hours passed with a torturous slowness. Every noise outside made me tense. I heard footsteps. Were they coming here? No. They passed by. I heard raised voices, discussing me maybe. Or maybe it was just my paranoia. My mind created horrible scenarios. I imagined being taken outside, being judged for something I did not understand, being punished for the simple crime of being in the wrong place, of being an intruder in their world. I thought of my children, of how they had abandoned me, and now, ironically, maybe I was going to die anyway, but not in the forest where they left me, but here, in a place they would never know, and no one would know what happened to me. I would simply disappear, as if I had never existed. And when the sun finally started to rise, when the first rays of light pierced the cracks, and the house lit up dimly, I heard movement outside. The cloth of the door moved, and someone entered. A young man, maybe about 25 or 30 years old, tall, with black hair down to his shoulders. He wore worn jeans and a button-down shirt. He looked different from the others, as if he had had contact with the outside world. He approached me, he looked at me, and then with a marked but clear accent he spoke. In English. "Good morning, sir. My name is Julian. How do you feel?" And those words, those simple words in my language made me cry with relief. I could not hold back the tears when I heard my language. Julian's words sounded like music, like a gift from heaven. "Julian," I repeated with a broken voice, "you speak English. Thank God you speak English." He nodded with a small smile. "I learned in the city. I went to study when I was a child, to a school in Boulder. Then I returned here. He sat on the floor next to me. My people are confused. They do not understand what you are doing here. They thought maybe you were someone from the government or a lost criminal. No, no, nothing like that. Please let me explain. I need you to help me explain to them. And I told him everything, every painful detail. I told him about Daniel, about Sarah, about the picnic that seemed like a gesture of love but was a trap, about how I fell asleep under the tree and woke up alone, about the days lost in the forest, about the hunger, the pain, about the cold, the snake, the fall, about how I thought I was going to die by that stream where they found me. While I spoke, Julian listened with his eyes getting wider, with an expression of horror and compassion. And when I finally finished telling my story, my voice broke completely. My own son, I whispered. My own blood left me to die, and I do not know why. I do not know what I did to deserve this. Julian remained silent for a moment, then stood up. Wait here. I am going to explain to them. He left the house, and I heard his voice outside speaking in that language I did not understand. But now it sounded different. Now I knew he was translating my story. He was telling them who I was, why I was there. And while he spoke, I heard how the tone of the other voices changed, the exclamations, the murmurs. And when Julian returned, he brought with him several of the men who had looked at me with mistrust. But their faces were different now. I no longer saw suspicion. I saw something else. Something that made me breathe for the first time in hours. Compassion. Finally, after so much, someone understood me. The men approached me. One of them, the one who had been hardest before, crouched next to my leg. He said something to Julian. He says, "Your leg is very bad," translated Julian, "that we have to clean and treat it before it gets more infected." 2 women came. One was the old woman from before. But now her expression was different. There was no longer mistrust. There was determination. They brought a bowl with hot water, clean rags, and something that looked like crushed herbs. Carefully they started to remove the dirty cloth from my leg. It hurt. God, how it hurt. I screamed. I grabbed the mat. But they continued, soft but firm. They cleaned the wound with hot water. They applied the crushed herbs. And although it burned like fire, I knew they were saving me. After treating my leg, which they wrapped with clean cloths and fresh leaves, they brought food. Real food. Not bitter berries from the forest. Not dirty water. But a clay plate full of black beans, hot flatbread, and some jerky that had a strong but delicious flavor. I ate slowly. My stomach, after empty days, protested. But I needed this. I needed to recover strength. A small girl brought me more water. She smiled at me shyly, and I smiled back, feeling something I had not felt in a long time. Humanity, kindness. These people, these strangers who owed me nothing, were taking care of me better than my own family. The days turned into weeks. I do not know exactly how many, maybe 3, maybe 4. Time there was different. It was measured by the sun, by meals, by nights around the bonfire. My leg healed slowly. Julian came every day to talk to me. He told me about his people, the Highwood clan, about how they had lived in these mountains for generations, about how the modern world had forgotten them, and they preferred it that way. Here we have peace, he told me. We do not have much, but we have peace. And I understood. Because in that simple village, without electricity, without cars, without everything I considered necessary, I had found more humanity than in my own home. When I could finally stand up, when I could walk with the help of a stick they made me, I told Julian I needed to return. I have to go back to Denver, I told him. I have to fix things. He understood. He spoke with the elders, and one day they told me I was ready, that they would take me to the nearest highway. That morning I said goodbye to every person who had cared for me. The old woman who at first looked at me with mistrust hugged me. The women who cured my leg gave me provisions for the road. The children waved goodbye, and I cried. I cried because these people had given me something my own family denied me. They had given me life. 4 men, including Julian, accompanied me. We walked for hours, through paths they knew like the back of their hand. We climbed hills. We went down ravines. And I, although my legs still hurt, although every step was an effort, kept going. Because now I had a purpose. Now I had something to walk for. Julian told me the highway was about 3 hours from his village. We do not like to go very often, he told me. But for you, Mr. Montgomery, we do it. You suffered a lot. You deserve to go home. And I did not know if I really wanted to return to that house. But I had to do it. I had to close that chapter. I had to do what I had to do. When we finally reached the highway, when I saw the black asphalt extending in both directions, I felt something strange, as if I were returning to a world that was no longer mine. We stood there waiting. 2 trucks passed and did not stop. Then a small car. It did not stop either. And then came a truck. Big. A cargo truck. Julian stood in the middle of the road, waving his arms. The truck slowed down. It stopped. The driver rolled down the window. "What is going on?" he asked, looking at our strange group. "My friend needs to get to Denver," said Julian. "Can you take him?" The truck driver looked at me. He saw my state, the torn clothes, the long beard, the wrapped leg, and nodded. "Get in, Grandpa. I am heading there." I turned to Julian, to the men who had accompanied me, and I did not know what to say. How do you thank someone for saving your life with words? With money I did not have. I opened my arms and hugged Julian. I hugged him tight, how I would hug a son, the son I wish I had had. "Thank you," I told him with a broken voice. "You saved my life. I will never forget it. Never." He patted my back. "Go with God, Mr. Montgomery. And remember, family is not always blood. Sometimes it is the people who find you when you are lost." His words stayed with me while I got into the truck, while I waved goodbye for the last time, while the truck started and the Highwood people disappeared in the distance. The truck advanced on the highway. The driver tried to make conversation, but I barely answered. My mind was elsewhere. It was in Denver at my house and what I was going to find when I arrived. How much time had passed since they left me in that forest? 2 weeks, 3 a month. With the time I spent lost, plus the time in the village, maybe 5 or 6 weeks had passed, almost 2 months. What would my children have done in all that time? Would they have reported me as missing, or would they have moved on as if I had never existed? And with every mile that passed, with every sign that brought us closer to the city, my heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from something else. From determination, from rage, from justice. When we were arriving in Denver, when I saw the first signs of the city, I asked the driver to drop me off a few blocks before my house. "Are you sure, Grandpa?" he asked, looking at me worried. "You still look weak. I can take you to your door." But I shook my head. "I need to walk," I told him. "I need to arrive on foot. I need to prepare myself." He did not understand. How could he understand? But he nodded and stopped the truck at a familiar corner. He helped me down. He wished me luck. And I stood there leaning on my improvised cane, looking at the street I had traveled 1,000 times in my life. But now it felt different, as if I were seeing everything for the first time, or maybe for the last time. I took a deep breath, and I started walking toward my house, toward whatever awaited me there. I saw the black wreath from half a block away. Black. Big. Hanging from the front door of my ranch, my heart stopped for a second. Then it started beating so fast I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. A black wreath, the symbol of mourning, the symbol of death. They had declared me dead. Of course, I'd been missing for weeks. What else were they going to think? Or rather, what else were they going to declare? Because while I got closer, while I saw that wreath moving slowly with the wind, a part of me wondered, did they really think I was dead, or did they just want everyone to think that? My pace slowed down. Not from tiredness, but because every yard I advanced brought me closer to a truth I was not sure I wanted to face. There were people on the street, my neighbors, Mr. Thomas, who lived 3 houses down, Mrs. Lucy, the lady who always brought me cookies at Christmas, young Ryan, who helped me with the garden sometimes. They stood in small groups. Some were crying, others talking in low voices with serious faces, and when they saw me approaching, when they recognized me under the long beard and dirty clothes, their faces transformed. First confusion, then absolute shock. Mr. Montgomery whispered Mrs. Lucy, bringing her hands to her mouth. But you... Mr. Thomas took a step toward me, pale as a sheet. They told us you had died. Your children said that? His voice broke, and I just nodded. Yes, I said with a calm voice, calmer than I felt inside. I imagined what they said. I got closer to my house, and then I saw it. The sign, big with black letters on a white background, nailed right next to the black wreath. Rest in peace, Arthur Montgomery, 1944, 2024. Teacher, father, beloved neighbor. I read it twice, 3 times, as if reading it more times would change the words. They had given me a date of death. They had declared me officially dead. And while I looked at that sign, while I read my own epitaph, something inside me hardened. It was no longer sadness I felt. It was no longer pain. It was something cold, something determined, something that said, "This is not going to end like this." I turned to the neighbors who had come closer. "When did they put this up?" I asked. 2 days ago, answered Ryan. There was a ceremony. Your children. Mr. Montgomery. What happened? Where were you all this time? I did not answer. I just kept walking toward the door, toward my door, the door of my house, of my home, the place where I had lived with Elizabeth, where I had raised my children, where I had planned to spend the rest of my days in peace. I put my hand on the knob, and I heard voices inside, voices I knew too well, clear, animated, voices that did not sound at all like people in mourning. I pushed the door. It was not locked. Of course not. It was no longer my house, right? It was theirs now, or at least that is what they thought. The door opened with a creak, and the voices became clearer. They came from the living room, from my living room, where my library was, my books, my whole life stored on those shelves. I entered slowly, leaning on my cane, and what I saw confirmed everything I had feared. There they were, the 3 of them, the 4, Daniel, Emily, and Oliver, and Sarah, my daughter-in-law. Daniel's wife sitting next to him with a folder full of papers, sitting around my dining table. But the table was not set for eating. It was covered in papers, documents, deeds, contracts. I saw the deeds to the properties I rented. I saw bank papers. I saw legal documents with stamps and signatures, and they were there, reviewing them, organizing them, dividing them, like vultures dividing a carcass. Daniel had a paper in his hand and was saying something to Oliver. Sarah was taking notes in a notebook, calculating something with a small calculator. Emily was holding another document, reading it with attention. In a corner of the living room, they had put boxes, moving boxes, and inside them my things, my books, my photos, my life packed as if it were worth nothing anymore. Several pieces of furniture had sticky notes. For Daniel, for Emily, sell. They were distributing me, my life, as if I no longer existed. The living room was destroyed, not physically but emotionally. The desk drawers were open with paper scattered. The cabinet where Elizabeth kept her good china was open with some plates already packed. On the wall where our wedding portrait had been, now there was an empty space. The portrait was leaning against a box, face down, as if it no longer mattered. I saw they had moved my favorite armchair, the armchair where I sat every afternoon to read. It was set aside with a note that said, "Sell $500. That armchair where I had sat for 30 years, where I had read hundreds of books, where I had rocked my grandchildren when they were babies, was worth $500 to them. And the books. My God, the books. My library was being dismantled. There were boxes full of them without care, without respect, just piled up like trash. I stood in the entrance of the living room. No one had seen me yet. They were so absorbed in their task, so concentrated on dividing my life, that they did not notice the door had opened, that someone had entered, that I was there standing alive, watching them do what they had planned from the beginning. Oliver was the first to look up. He was saying something about a property downtown when his eyes met mine. He froze with his mouth open mid-word. His face went white, completely white, as if he had seen a ghost. And I suppose in a way he had. Daniel noticed Oliver's expression. "What is wrong?" he asked, and followed his gaze. And when he saw me, the paper he had in his hand fell to the floor. Sarah looked up from her notebook, and when her eyes met mine, the calculator slipped from her hands and fell on the table with a dry thud. Her face lost all color. Emily still did not see me. She was back-turned, checking something in another box. "Emily," I said. My voice came out calm, too calm, like the silence before a storm. She turned around, and when she saw me, when her eyes processed that I was standing there in the entrance, her face went through 1,000 emotions in a second. Confusion, shock, and then joy, pure joy. "Dad," she screamed. A scream that echoed through the whole house, a scream that was probably heard onto the street. She stood up so fast the chair fell behind her. "Dad, but you are alive." She ran toward me with tears running down her face. She hugged me so tight, she almost made me lose my balance. We thought they told us that. "My God, Dad, where were you? What happened?" And in her hug, in her real tears, I knew something. Emily did not know. My daughter had not been part of the plan. She really thought I was dead, and that realization broke my heart in a new way. But Daniel and Oliver did not move. Sarah neither. The three of them stayed there, petrified, sitting pale, looking at me, as if I were a nightmare come true. Because for them, I was their perfect plan, their plan to get rid of me. It had failed. I had survived. I had returned. And now I was standing in front of them with all the evidence of their betrayal scattered on my dining table. "Emily," I said softly, pulling her away from me. She looked at me with eyes full of tears and confusion. "I need you to sit down and listen, because there are things you do not know, things your brothers did not tell you." She blinked. "What? What are you talking about?" "Dad," I looked at Daniel, then at Sarah, then at Oliver. "Why don't you tell her? Why don't you tell your sister how I ended up lost in the Rockies? Why don't you explain that beautiful picnic you planned?" I looked directly at Sarah, "That picnic where you were Sarah, where you gave me that juice that made me sleep so deep." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. He said nothing. Sarah lowered her gaze, unable to hold my eyes, and then I told them. To Emily. To the neighbors who had entered behind me, attracted by the scream. I told her about the Sunday Daniel appeared smiling, about the picnic in the mountains, about how Sarah had prepared the sandwiches and the juice, about how they asked me to rest, about the bitter taste in my mouth when I woke up, about being alone in that forest, about the lost days, about thinking I was going to die. And while I spoke, while the words came out of my mouth, I saw how Emily's face changed, from confusion to horror, from horror to rage. She turned to Daniel. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Is it true what he is saying?" She looked at Sarah. "You too, Sarah." "You were also in this." Daniel did not answer. He just looked at the floor. Sarah did not speak either. She just trembled, and that silence was all the answer she needed. "Did you let him die in the forest?" She screamed. "That was what you did." Her voice broke in a sob. "And you lied to me. You told me he had gone out for a walk and did not return. You made me mourn his death, knowing that you—" She could not finish. She just cried. And I, seeing my daughter break, felt a mixture of pain and vindication. At least one of my children still had a soul. Then I spoke, and my voice, although calm, had a weight that made everyone shut up. "Did I get revenge for what they did to me?" I asked, looking directly at Daniel, then at Sarah. then at Oliver. No. Revenge is a poison that destroys whoever takes it. I have seen too much hate in my life to feed more. But I did justice, because justice is not revenge. Justice is putting things in their place. It is making the truth known. It is ensuring that consequences reach those who deserve them. I approached the table. I took one of the documents. These properties, this house, everything that is here. It is mine. I built it with my work, with the sweat of decades of teaching, and you. I looked at Daniel and Oliver, and you, Sarah. You thought you could take it from me. You thought you could erase me from existence and keep everything. I dropped the paper. But you were wrong. I called the police from the highway. They are on their way. And I also called the journalists. Because this is not going to stay in silence. All of Denver is going to know what you tried to do. As if my words had summoned them, I heard sirens outside. But one, then another. The sound became stronger, closer. I saw the panic in Daniel's eyes. I saw how Sarah stood up from the chair with her hands trembling. I saw how Oliver stood up, looking toward the door like a cornered animal. "You cannot prove anything," said Oliver with a trembling voice. "It is your word against ours. We will say you got confused, that you are senile." I laughed. It was a humorless laugh. Dry. Senile, I survived 6 days in a forest. I survived a fall that broke my leg. I survived without food, without water, without anything. And I walked until I found help. Does it seem to you that someone senile could do that? The footsteps of the police were heard going up the porch stairs. And besides, I have witnesses. The Highwood people, the indigenous people who saved me, they can confirm my story. They can confirm the state in which they found me. The door opened. 2 police officers entered, and behind them a reporter with a camera. Everything happened fast after that. The police heard my complaint. They saw the documents scattered on the table. They saw the black wreath outside. They saw my physical state, and they arrested Daniel and Sarah and Oliver. Not immediately. First they took statements. First they called more units. But when I told them everything, when the neighbors confirmed I had been missing and that my children had declared my death, when I showed the marks on my leg, the scars on my arms, the state of my body after weeks of suffering, they had no choice. "Attempted homicide by abandonment," said one of the officers. "Fraud, forgery of documents. This is serious." I saw how they handcuffed my son, my firstborn, the boy I had carried in my arms, the boy I had taught to read. I saw how they handcuffed Sarah, the woman who had been part of my family for years, the one who had called me father-in-law, with a smile the one who had betrayed me, with the same ease with which she had prepared that spiked juice. And I did not feel sadness. I did not feel remorse. I only felt a cold void where once there was love. Emily cried inconsolably, "I am sorry, Dad. I did not know. I swear I did not know." I hugged her. "I know, my daughter. I know." The following days were a whirlwind. The story appeared in all the local newspapers. Teacher abandoned in forest by his children survives and returns to get justice. The interviews, the cameras people stopping me on the street to tell me I was a hero. But I did not feel like a hero. I just felt like a tired old man who had had to fight for his right to exist. Daniel and Sarah and Oliver faced charges. The legal process was long. There were lawyers, hearings, testimonies. Julian and 2 elders from the Highwood clan came to the city to testify. They told how they had found me and what state I was, how long they cared for me. And the judge, an older man with a serious face, looked at my son and my daughter-in-law and said, "Abandoning your elderly father in a remote forest is one of the cruelest things I have seen in 30 years of career." The sentence was not long jail time. The legal system is rarely hard with these cases, but it was enough. And more importantly, it was public. Their reputation was destroyed. They lost their jobs, their friendships, their place in society. Emily stayed with me. She helped me reorganize the house, to return the books to their shelves, to hang Elizabeth's and my wedding portrait again, and little by little my house became my house again. But it was never the same, because now I knew. I knew what people you trust are capable of. I knew that family love was no guarantee of anything. I knew that in the end, everyone reveals their true nature when there is something at stake. I returned to my routine, to my books, to my walks, to my afternoons in the armchair they almost sold for $500. And every time I sat there, every time I opened a book, I thought of the Highwood people, of how they complete strangers had given me more love and care than my own blood. And I understood something Julian had told me. Family is not always blood. Sometimes it is the people who find you when you are lost. Sometimes it is the people who give you water when you are thirsty. Sometimes it is the people who heal your wounds without asking for anything in return. That house, the house where everything happened, is no longer the same. The walls remember Emily's screams when she discovered the truth. The dining room remembers the scattered documents of the division of my life. The door remembers the black wreath that declared me dead ahead of time. And me, I remember everything every day in that forest, every night of terror, every moment when I thought I was going to die. I remember it not with bitterness, but as a lesson about who you really are when no one is watching, a lesson about the value of true kindness, and a lesson that surviving is not just keeping breathing. It is choosing to move forward, even when everything tells you to give up. I survived not because I was strong, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of fulfilling their plan. I refused to disappear silently. I refused to be a victim. And that refusal, that stubbornness my children criticized so much, was what saved me. That family, that game of appearances of happy Sundays and family picnics was never the same again. And I learned that sometimes what breaks does not need to be repaired. It only needs to be recognized for what it always was, an illusion. And you, if you discovered that your own family tried to abandon you, could you forgive, or would you get justice like me? Have you ever felt that the people you love most are the ones who can hurt you the most? If this story touched something in you, if it made you feel, if it made you think, leave me your comment down here telling me what you would do in my place, like so more people can hear this story. And subscribe, because every day we share real stories of real people who face the impossible and survive to tell it. Thanks for listening to my story until the end. See you in the next story.